In the previous lesson, we built this simple lower third graphic using Singular's Composer. Now it's time to put it to use during a live show. In Singular, we can do that with control applications, which allow us to add content to overlays, make presets, take them in and out in real time, generate playlists that can automatically loop, and so on. Singular offers two control applications, Studio and Uno. Studio is a rundown style control app, suitable for overlays that require a list of graphics to automatically go on air based on preset timers. It can be used on a desktop browser as the UI was mainly designed for horizontal mode, but it can still be docked into OBS with a vertical layout. Third-party tools such as Bitfocus Companion can be used in combination with Singular for more complex setups. However, Studio doesn't have an API, meaning commands from Companion won't be reflected in the Studio UI. Uno, on the other hand, is more flexible, works perfectly across all devices, including desktops, mobile phones and tablets, and there's even a Streamdeck plugin. Uno is great for simpler graphics controls, but it doesn't include a preview window or automation features. Ultimately, choosing between Studio and Uno depends on the nature of your show and your specific needs, but both are effective for most use cases. Regardless of your choice, the endpoint is still the live streaming software. The final graphics are delivered via an output URL, which can be imported as a browser source into any software that's supported. Output URLs can be opened in as many devices as you'd like, no limitations. In this lesson, we'll focus on Studio, and in the next one, we'll dive into Uno so we can draw comparisons between them. Here we are in the dashboard of Singular. We'll start by creating a new control application from the composition we made in the previous lesson. At first, we'll be prompted to choose between Studio and Uno. We'll click on Studio and we'll rename this before we hit Create. And you'll notice that the icon got carried over from the composition because if I enable the inspector, I actually chose a custom icon for this composition. I believe it was this one, 40 by 40 pixels. Now, before we open this up, just make sure you're using Google Chrome as your browser because it's the most stable when it comes to Singular. And here we have the Studio user interface. On the left, we have the Playlists panel where we can click here to add an overlay or use the plus button. So let's say click here. Now we have the big and small overlays. If we click on any of them, you'll see them first show up in the preview window. And then I can hit Take, which will bring it into the output window. And this is what will show up in the output URL. Now we can select the small one to bring it to the preview and then take that in. Now we could say only show the preview window or the output window. And if we go over to these three dots at the top, under preview settings, we can choose to set a custom background. So let's use this cooking one, hit OK, and now we can see our graphics in a different context. In fact, you can even choose to use a custom image. So back in my assets folder in the dashboard, I've imported this background. So if I enable the inspector, I can copy its URL and paste it here, hit OK. This will just help us visualize the graphics as we take a look at different features. Right now, if I want to take this overlay out, I have to do that manually. But we could set a timer here by double clicking and let's say type in 3 seconds. You can even right click and choose a preset value here. But now when we hit take in, it will be visible for 3 seconds and then go out automatically. So this way we don't have to worry about taking the graphic out. We can instead focus on one of the million things we have to do during a live show. Now I want to right click again just so I can show you a few more shortcuts here. So we can take in, which is the same as clicking this button, or we can use the Control-I shortcut. We can rename, duplicate, delete. So if I hit delete here, it'll actually say use Shift Delete to delete a page without warning. So if I hit Shift Delete on the big one, we don't have to confirm it. Let me bring these back in. Now, if I want to rename it, either hit Control-R or double click on the title. So let's say call this lower third small. Copy it, paste it over here, change it to big. The name and timer can be set under the overlay editor. And here you'll even be able to see part of what layer this overlay is, if any. Now let's bring this small graphic in, and now let's start modifying the contents. So because we didn't add any control nodes inside the sub-composition back in Composer, we're not able to see anything here. Instead, we have to add a global data page. This is essentially the root level. And here you can see the node container we made alongside every single control node. Now we could just for visual clarity bring this at the top, and we'll double click to rename this to Singular, and then duplicate it, and we'll double click and call it Uno. And we'll start by changing the image to the Uno icon. Now we do have to take this in just so it updates. And what we're now seeing in the output window is what we have set up here in this global data page. Now let's change the title to overlays.uno. Then we'll do 100% free graphics. But so far we're not seeing any changes, and that's because we have to hit the update page button. And there you saw the update animation play. Now you can choose to disable the option that requires you to hit update whenever you make changes to these control nodes. But this is just a safety measure because if the graphic is live on air, you don't want those changes to constantly be showing up as the graphic is live. Now we can even change the color of the title box. So if I hit F11 to go out of full screen, I can use the Colorzilla extension and then pick the color from the Uno logo and just paste the hex code in there. Then we can hit update, and there you go. So now we can decide which lower third we want to show and then switch the content with the two global data pages. Think of these as presets. Now you'll notice that when I switch to the small one, it first takes out the big overlay, and that's again got to do with the fact that we set up layers in Composer, and both of these are part of the same bottom layer, so they can't both be on air at the same time. Under active overlays here, if we drop down this arrow, here we can find every single layer. So there's the global data, so the root level, then we have the bottom layer. And it's currently red because it's on air, but we can click to take it out. So we don't have to worry about finding which overlay we have to take out. We can just click on the layer itself. Or we could right click here and say take all in. Pages that will come in are either going to be the ones that were last visible, or if we right click and take all out, we can then right click on each of these layers and say choose lower third big here and then Uno over here, and then right click take all in. So now the big overlay came in with the Uno content. Now let's drop down the active overlays and focus on the playlists features. First of all, we can switch between a grid or a list view. Here it's called playlist mode or button mode. And we could say take all out on this playlist or use this button at the top to start and stop the playlist. Let's go back to list view and bring both of these back in. I want to mention a couple more things here. So delete all pages will basically delete everything we have here, but I don't want to do that because then we'll have to set everything up from scratch. But there's also the auto playlist function. And once we hit it, it will also add us to include a timer. So let's say 5 seconds and hit OK. It will generate a page for each sub-composition we had in the Composer. And it did assign a 5-second timer in this case because we told it to. I wanted to bring this up because in cases where you have a bunch of sub-compositions designed in the Composer, it's a bit of a hassle to add them one by one and assign timers to them. Instead, you can just use the auto playlist feature. And don't forget, if you want to, you can delete everything all at once. But let's hit Shift Delete to get rid of them without confirmation. Now I'll go ahead and only show the output window moving forward, just so we can focus a bit better. And what if now we want to generate a bunch of presets that contain different types of content within the same lower third and have the graphics cycle through that list automatically? Now, because we set up control nodes in the root level, having these pages in the same playlist will cause a conflict. So let's say set the auto advance on, and we'll take these out, right click, set a timer real quick, and hit take in on the first one. Once it finishes, it moves on to the next one. And then once that finishes, it will move on to the next one, and that's when we'll see the lower third big. But it doesn't really make sense this way. Instead, we'll take the timer off for all of them. And up here under the playlist, we can double click to rename it to content. Then we'll create a new playlist and we'll call this L3 small. Then we can go back and right click on the small one and move the overlay to the new playlist we made. Same with the big one, but this time we'll choose new playlist and we'll call this L3 big. So now we can take this small lower third in over at this playlist, then back in the content playlists, we'll set a timer for both of these pages, and then we can either set this playlist to auto advanced or loop, the difference between the two being auto advanced will cycle through each page after their timer ends, but once it reaches the end, it will go away, whereas the loop will cycle back to the beginning and keep going. So let's enable loop and then we'll play the first one, and after 3 seconds the Uno content will show up, then the singular one, then Uno, and back and forth. In the midst of this, if we want to, we can bring in the big version while the content is cycling through independent of these two playlists. And actually you don't have to go into the playlist, you can just use the start and stop playlist button over here. Now don't forget you can drag and rearrange these, you can duplicate this and call it something else. Change the colors. And very quickly now you have another page that you can show. And there's even a special function you can add called a pause. So when we get to this guy, we can say wait for 2 seconds. And then move on to the next one. Now, what if at one point we want to make changes to the design of these graphics? First, we have to come back to the dashboard and open up the composition. And here, let's say open the big sub-composition and maybe shrink this down horizontally and even vertically. Then come back to the control app and simply hit this refresh composition button and OK. And you'll see the graphic has been updated once we bring it back in. This is the beauty of Singular being entirely web-based. You can easily make changes and have those be reflected very quickly. Now, what if we want to make some more drastic changes to the design? Well, first of all, let's create a duplicate so we have the original one as a backup. And we'll call this one Simple Graphics V2. Now we'll go into the small lower third and let's say we'll create a couple of control nodes, call this one title, duplicate it, and we'll call this one subtitle. And let's make sure we connect the text property to that title control node and the subtitle one to its control node. So now when we bring up the composition navigator and take that graphic in, you'll see that the title and subtitle are being affected by these two control nodes. Now back in the studio, because we created a new composition entirely, hitting the refresh button won't do anything. Instead, we have to click on this hamburger icon, which will greet you with a warning saying that you will lose all of your pages and playlists if you confirm this action, but we'll hit OK and we'll choose version 2. Now we'll go ahead and auto playlist, hit OK. We'll take the small one in, and here we can see the control nodes that we created inside of the sub-composition. And I only did this for demonstration purposes, so if I delete the other two, and we'll rename the playlist, all we have to do now is duplicate just this page and then make changes to any of these. And we can set timers. We'll take this first out before we can change the timer on that one. Hit auto playlist and play. Now, because these control nodes are present within the subcomp itself, we don't have to create separate playlists in order to avoid any conflict. So this is just a detail to consider depending on how you have things set up. So we can now move on to the next step, which is to show these graphics in our live streams. First, we need to grab the output URL, either by clicking on this clipboard icon or by hitting on the 3 dots and choosing output URL. And here we have the same clipboard icon, or we can hover over this so we can scan the QR code if we want to use another device as an additional preview monitor. And here in OBS, we'll add a browser source. We'll call it Singular. Then we'll paste the output URL and we'll set the dimensions to 1920 by 1080. Now I am recording in 4K, so I can either click and drag to fit this to the screen or right click, transform fit to screen, or even use the Control F shortcut. And there's our graphic. And here I have OBS and Studio side by side, so I can show you what happens when I take the other one in. And here I have vMix open just to demonstrate that you can in fact add output URLs in any software that supports browser sources. Paste the URL, hit OK. And once this loads up, we can bring it into overlay number 1. And in Studio, I can take in the small version. You could even do this entirely on your mobile phone, as streaming apps such as Prism Live also support URL inputs. But I'll quickly come back to the dashboard and move over to the Output Manager, which is where we can create custom outputs. So just hit New, set a name for it, hit Create, and back in Studio we can detach the current output and load in the new one we created. So feel free to use this URL in any live streaming software, or again, we could use our mobile phones to preview what this looks like. But first, let's set a background color, let's say blue, which will modify the URL for us. And here you have the RGB values. Now we can copy this, then open up a new tab and we'll paste this URL in, just so I can show you that this URL can actually be modified. So let's type in 128 instead, which will give us middle gray. Another thing we can find under these 3 dots are the Manage Access options. This app URL can be shared with anybody in the world. If I open a new tab and paste that in, we'll have the same Control App URL show up. The added convenience being that we won't need to sign into our Singular account to control these graphics. So again, you can send this to someone on the other end of the planet and they will very quickly and easily be able to make changes. When it comes to controlling these graphics in Studio and seeing them in the context of the live stream, we have a few options. We can set Studio and OBS side by side, but for more real estate, we can move Studio to a second monitor, because the UI for it was designed with a horizontal mode in mind. There is a third way that also makes use of the app URL, but instead of copying it right away, let's hide the app header, which is this bar up here, and make the UI layout vertical. Those 2 options modify the URL for us. Now we can copy it. In OBS, we can head over to Docs, Custom Browser Docs, we'll name it Singular, paste in the URL, and once we hit Apply, we'll get this floating window, which we can dock over, say, to the left side here. Let's close this out. And here we have a preview window on the bottom left. We have the playlist with our pages, and the overlay editor. So we can do everything from inside of OBS. Let's click to bring up the big lower third, and we can select any of these to preview what they look like before bringing them in. So this is a neat way to keep things all in one place instead of having to jump between Studio and your live streaming software. Another way we can control graphics in Studio is by using a Stream Deck and the third-party tool Bitfocus Companion. Stream Decks are these very lovely devices that come in different shapes and sizes. Stream Deck does have its own software that can connect to various different things, but when it comes to Singular and the Studio Control app, the only way to send a command with a Stream Deck is by using Companion. Once we launch Companion, it will set up a local server for us, then we can launch the user interface. And here we can set up connections with a lot of different things, but we can search for Singular and add it. But the connection has failed because we need the app token, which we can find under Manage Access. And here we have the app token. We can even generate a new one. We'll copy that, and back in Companion, we'll paste and hit save. And we'll get a green check mark indicating that the connection has been successfully made. Let's move over to the Buttons tab, and here we can create a new button, and we'll call it L3 Small. We can set the font size, maybe hide this top bar, and even change the background color. And anything we set up in Companion, as long as the surface is connected, so here we have the Stream Deck, you'll see those buttons show up here. Now let's take a look at what actions we have available with the Singular connection. Here we can see a bunch of them, but for this lesson we'll focus on a few of them. Let's choose the Animate In, and here we can decide which composition we want to animate in, so that's L3 Small, but we also want to use the same button to animate it out. So that's when we use what are called steps. So we can hit +1 and then search for Animate Out, choose the same composition, And you can see that step 1 is flickering. That means that's the currently selected step. So if we go back to it, whatever actions are present inside of this step is what Companion is going to send over to Singular. So when we press the button on the Stream Deck, the lower third will come into Studio. Now there is one issue here you might have noticed, and that's the in button didn't go red. Studio doesn't have an API, meaning any commands you send from Companion to Studio will not be reflected. So now you can see if I click over here, nothing happens because it was already in, and then we can say take it out. But let's stay in Companion for now. We'll hit Ctrl-C to copy this button and then Ctrl-V to paste it. Now we can change this to big and also change the compositions on each of these steps. So now this button will take the big lower third in. Now let's create a new button and we'll call it Singular. Set the color to something like a dark blue, lower the font size, and hide that top bar. And we'll use the Singular action called Update Control Node. So let's say we set the title to Singular.live, same as we had before. Then we can duplicate this and then set the subtitle control node to Cloud-based Live Graphics, was it? And finally, we can add another action, which is called Update Color Field. And here we can set the title box color to, what did we have? I think it was something like this. Now let me quickly copy and paste this. We'll rename this one to Uno and choose sort of a orange color. And then here we'll make changes accordingly. Here at the end, I've added another update control node action where I've set the image value to be the URL of the Uno logo, and same for the Singular one. So we can switch back to the small version and then choose between Uno and Singular. All with one click of a button, but with one caveat, and that is there is no API. So it might be a bit confusing sometimes as to what is happening between the two programs, but I think it's a small inconvenience to have, especially considering all the features that BitFocus Companion offers you, such as being able to set up connections with a variety of different things and send commands to all of those at the same time, including Singular. One last thing to consider is when it comes to making changes in the composition. Before we took a look at how we can refresh the control app and those changes are automatically read. But with Companion, what we have to do is first disable the connection, then re-enable it, and also refresh the page. And you should be able to see those new compositions or control nodes that you created show up in the list of actions. This was the quite packed Studio Control application walkthrough, but I hope you are now aware of all the possibilities when it comes to operating graphics during live shows. In the next lesson, we'll take a look at the Uno Control app, see what features it has, and compare it to Studio. With that, I will see you in the next lesson.